Right, thank you for the invitation. And I think my talk will be rather speculative. I'm going to look at the idea or the rhetorical figure of the hero and the crisis. Well, first of all, as a rhetorical figure. And the problem that I want to deal with is this idea that no matter how much we realize that the categories of crisis and the hero are incredibly problematic, somehow we find ourselves returning to these categories because in a problematic way they seem to be connected with the very task of telling history. To a certain degree, to speak of history, to tell histories in art, or in general, means to return to the rhetorical figures of the hero and the figure of crisis. So first of all, I want to speak about sort of this rhetorical moment a bit and the link of the hero and the crisis to the notion of collectivity or the collective experience of history. And then in the second part, I will get more speculative and talk about kind of the mythic truth of the hero. The idea that the hero and the moment of crisis reveal the secret of life and what to deal with that, how to deal with that. So first it's about sort of the relation of the individual to the collective and the collective experience of history as mirrored in the experience of crisis and the figure of the hero as an individual standing in for the collective. And then I want to talk a bit about sort of the hero or the moment of crisis as things through which the secret or the essence of life is revealed. Right. There is, of course, a way to treat the figure of the hero which at least attempts to be unproblematic. And it is in our kind of consumer society, the way to deal with kind of problematic concepts is first of all to individualize them. To say like, maybe we shouldn't be talking about the problematic history of the hero, the glorification of the hero in ideological systems. The way how we kind of throw out that ideology is by making it strictly personal. This is just like, I typed in hero in Google and this is the first site I found. It's kind of a project about sort of making people speak about their heroes. So encouraging individuals to pick their heroes like they might sort of pick their favorite band or they might choose the car to drive or whatever. This is sort of would be a way of sort of rigidly trying to get rid of the ideology of the hero by individualizing the figure of the hero. Like, pick your hero, there's nothing wrong with it, feel free to pick one. You want a medium latte or a big latte, or what kind of hero do you pick? This is kind of the society of choices, of options, of personality options. And in a way, of course, I shouldn't be making fun of it too much, because in a way, I would say in the 90s, a lot of art that sort of started talking a bit about the constitution of the subject again, and brought in narratives of how self is made and produced, actually made use of this idea of sort of a kind of private, personal, consumerist mode of creating sense and meaning for yourself in your life. And this way is sort of a totally private and personal relationship to an icon or a hero is, of course, the relationship of fandom. The way how you kind of fabricate yourself or your personality by creating a personal, meaningful relationship with a hero. And it is, of course, something that Elizabeth Peyton very much lived out and exemplified in her drawings. And there are these paradigmatic drawings where you see that it's very much sort of the relationship between the individual and the hero is a very intimate relationship between a person and an image. Be that sort of this, here it's the individual relating to his own image as a star, or here is, you could maybe even say, a self-portrait of the artist, sort of relating to novels, to images, and sort of constructing herself as an honest fan who builds her personality through this intimate relationship to images. And the idea sort of that is also kind of defended in Anglo-American cultural studies, that the meaning of a popular icon is never entirely prefabricated, that is up to the creative consumers to put meaning into these icons and thereby sort of create a world for themselves. So I suppose you could make a very strong point in defense of this sort of personalized version of how everybody can have their own heroes and sort of construct their personality and selves through these heroes by reliving commonly available dreams and turning them into their own kind of stories. This is a wonderful movie by Rodney Graham called Why I Never Became a Rambling Man. And here you have somebody like living out a fantasy of the cowboy hero, but in a way sort of making it happen for himself. So in this video you kind of see him riding on his horse into the frame. He gets down, picks a tune on his guitar, and then gets up on the horse again and rides into the sunset. It's a way sort of, in this idea, heroes are up for grabs, they're available, and you got to pick them from the stocks and kind of make it happen for yourself. And it's of course very charming, and in a certain way of course true, because we all deal with our heroes in that sense. This idea of impersonation, identification, and sort of embodiment of the available heroes that we can get from the shops. The problem where, of course, that story starts getting, where you realize that you cannot only deal with that on a personal level, is when that kind of fantasy, Why I Never Became a Rambling Man, this kind of cowboy legend, is suddenly staged not as a personal mythology, but as a kind of a public mythology. So, a mythology that suddenly reaches all television screens worldwide. And here, of course, we have a kind of applied fantastic, obviously staged. This image is as staged as the kind of Rodney Graham photo of himself as a cowboy, but it has, of course, a collective impact. And here we have the most traditional notion of the hero, a hero through whose death a collective is formed, or around whose death a collective forms. So the hero is simultaneously always dead and alive. So we have the dead firefighters, or the surviving firefighter representing the dead firefighters, representing the moment of crisis as a crucial tipping point or turning point in which suddenly the fate of a nation is decided, in which the historical process accelerates and suddenly a decisive turning point is reached. And sort of the hero embodies that turning point, and through his death and resurrection. It is kind of the most, like, almost like Greek tragedy. The hero has to die to give rise to the new people. Fighting with the gods, he kind of gives birth to the new nation. And here, sort of on the smoldering ashes of the old, which is sort of the moment of crisis, the new order is resurrected, and the hero is the figure who is sacrificed in the moment of crisis and who resurrects the new order as he comes back alive again. So the reason why I'm showing this image is, for me, this sort of big question. We know how to deal with heroes on a personal level, and it kind of works, it's honest, but when we see images like that, we are forced to face the question, what is the collective dimension of heroes? The incredible, powerful function of the hero to build collectives, to sort of be the figure that gives birth to the new nation. How do we deal with this collective dimension? And actually, the moment when I started thinking about a work of art that taught me about this connection between crisis and the hero as a kind of cipher for the self-understanding of a collective or of collective history is a wonderful film by the Lithuanian filmmaker Deimantas Narkevičius called Kaimietis, which is apparently means countryman, and it's actually one of my favorite works of art. This is a fantastic film because it, in a way, is an investigation of the rhetorics of how you tell history and the role of the hero in that context. So the film starts as a 16mm film with this image of a bust, of a monument, and then as the film sort of unravels, you get to know that this is a bust that was, after the downfall of the Soviet Union, erected to commemorate Lithuanian partisans, the partisans that fought against the Russian forces. And of course, the first, like the biggest, almost hilarious contradiction is that sort of this bust to commemorate this sort of anti-Soviet partisan is done in a classic Soviet social realist style. Sort of that in the moment of crisis, when suddenly a whole ideological apparatus of explaining history, kind of the Soviet ideology, disappears, and a new ideology is supposed to be born, the only rhetorics, the only language, the only visual language you have to commemorate this moment of change is actually the language of the old system, because a new language has not yet been born. And Walter Benjamin also writes about this, the moment of crisis as the moment where language is lost, because the old goes away and the new hasn't even been born. And that is, Walter Benjamin says, that is why the hero is always silent. The hero doesn't speak, because he embodies the moment of transition where the old language is lost and the new hasn't been found. So this is the kind of the awkwardness of this bust, of this monument, stands for the fact that new times are coming, but the language to describe this new times hasn't yet been found. All that there is to describe the new times, paradoxically, is the language of the old times. And while we see this paradoxical image, we hear a monologue of the sculptor, the artist who has made this bust, sort of talking with a low and very dramatic voice, and speaking about creating his own heroic mythology, speaking about how he was selected as a young man to make this bust and what a big task it was and how he came up with the idea. So it's a classical, almost 18th century kind of genius, heroic monologue. But at some point his monologue breaks down. Also he loses his language. At some point he just kind of complains and says like, you know, at the moment we're suffering from crisis. No one knows where things are going. No one has an idea where the future of this country may lie, and without an idea of the future, you cannot have an understanding of its history. So here again we have a breakdown of one language, of heroic interpretation of the past, which suddenly falls apart and reveals a kind of discourse of crisis in insecurity. And at that moment, the image changes, and you have a kind of academic drawing of the face of the sculptor, and his lips are animated in cartoon. He becomes sort of an empty vessel, an empty talking vessel. And his discourse again is interrupted by the discourse of a young woman who was interviewed, I think, in Amsterdam, and she says that for her, she is kind of speaking the discourse of the personal. She says that the only way that she can relate to Lithuania is through her language, because she can only honestly express her personal feelings in Lithuanian. So here we have the counter-discourse of the personal, which for a moment replaces the collective discourse of heroics, which has apparently failed. This discourse is honest and incredibly touching, but at the same time the film shows that it is absolutely incapable of grasping the dimension of history. So that she testifies to the breakdown of a collective language, but it's also clear that the personal language itself cannot describe the moment of historical change. And this becomes clear that during the last words that she's speaking, suddenly there's Wagner on the soundtrack. It's incredible, like Lohengrin, the man without history, sort of building up to a crescendo. And while the music is playing, you see like empty spaces in Vilnius. So it's backyards, empty cellars. And to some degree, this kind of the pathos of the music is mirrored in the images, and to a certain degree, it's also kind of voided or eroded. So the music builds up, and it is kind of the pathos of collective history, of memory, of the kind of collective dream. But what you see is in a way empty images. So the beauty of this film, as I understand it, is that it in a way shows that to speak the language of the collective, the language of heroics, is impossible today. It's almost laughable. But still, the language of the personal is not a full substitute. We live in a strange position that it is impossible to speak on behalf of the collective in these heroic terminologies, but at the same time it would be necessary. We would have to speak in these terms to give ourselves an understanding of the collective dimension of the experience that we're currently undergoing. So this sort of experience of crisis, of change, is at the same time an experience of the crisis of history, an experience of the loss of the necessary historical terminology that we would need to explain our own experience. And this film, in a way, works like a negative dialectic. it shows that a certain language doesn't work anymore, but it also points to the necessity of finding a new language of collective expression, but just making it clear that this language doesn't exist yet and probably will never exist. It's just wanting, it's lacking, it's missing. That is one way of speaking about sort of the hero, the heroic, pathetic discourse as a discourse that was used to express the collective experience of history, which is now wanting, by pointing to kind of a lack of a collective mode of address. Another way to use it in a more positive dialectic and playful and provocatively would be in the work of Lucy Mackenzie and Paulina Orlowska. For instance, this is a painting by Lucy Mackenzie called Global Joy. It's a big, almost a really big canvas based on the wall painting, The Frieze, by Walter Womacker, a GDR artist, on this Haus des Lehrers. I think it was a kind of library, cultural center for the educators in East Berlin, which is this frieze is wrapped around the entire building, and it kind of shows a member of each group of society. So it's a representation of the collective. And what Lucy Mackenzie did was, in a way, she takes on board the mode of address, of collective address. This image speaks in with the voice of the collective, but at the same time, the figures that she has inserted into this image are individualists. So we have a kind of paradoxical rhetorical situation here. It's a kind of individualism promoted with a logic of collectivism. So a kind of a head-on collision of two rhetorics. And in a way it's also asked the question, can we still speak in the language of collectivism? Do we still buy that? Is that still convincing? Right. And sort of playing with these kind of logic of collective, or with the rhetoric of collective address, Lucy Mackenzie and Paulina Orlowska created a bar in Warsaw called Nowa Populana, in which they kind of staged a semi-fictional, semi-real bohemian environment, sort of celebrating sort of the artist collective, but using this language of collectivity at this moment to, in a way, stage a different hero. So the hero of the Bohemian collective is no longer the male artist as genius, but here it's kind of it's themselves, the two sort of female artists as engineers. They had sort of, when they were doing service behind the bar, they had these dresses made for them by a friend, sort of playing the role of this kind of futurist, 1920s avant-gardist artist as social engineer, as architect or whatever, sort of embodying, sort of making use of the rhetorics of collectivity to stage another hero. In this sense of the modern woman as a new and different hero. To retell the story of modernity, but with a different idea of a hero, a heroine in this sense. This is another installation by Paulina Orlowska that she did in Braunschweig in the Kunstverein, where she, from a book about female writers in modernity, of painters and writers, she just took book illustrations and created this kind of hall of fame, a kind of a salon where you have writers like Virginia Woolf, Vanessa Bell, and painters from the Bloomsbury Group, and it's sort of these icons on wheels. So each painting is like is set on wheels, so you can move them around. So here we really have almost a ghost dance, an invocation of a collective. A scene is being made. The stage is prepared for a different account of history, and a different collectivity is invoked. And this time it's the collectivity of the kind of the modern woman, of a different hero. So this is saying, like, obviously, so to speak of the collective and to speak of the hero is entirely rhetorical, but we can use these rhetorics to rewrite history and stage another hero. And this is another of Paulina Orlowska's drawings, which I like very much. It's a very simple drawing, but it's kind of shifting perspective on the hero. And by saying you see these sort of two legs of these two women possibly sitting there. For me, it's very much the situation of two women sitting at a coffee table while the parade goes by. And you look at the soldiers like, yeah, nice ass, yeah, you know, this kind of. so totally sort of shifting perspective on this idea of the hero, that the hero is also somebody who's always on display. It's a kind of a sex object, somebody who asks to be admired, and is therefore also a subject of the gaze of others who control him. Right. That would be another way of using the rhetorics of collectivity, but not to point to the fact that the rhetoric that would describe our collective experience today is missing, but to say like, okay, if it's rhetorical, we can use it, but to tell a different story, to use it from another side. These would be my first two thoughts about the hero as a rhetorical tool that makes us either aware of the fact that the rhetoric to describe collective experience is missing, or that we can recreate it creatively for ourselves in a speculative way that is kind of possible, impossible, and kind of speculatively playful. Second thought in this talk is the hero as embodying the secret of life. A text that I must confess I read for the first time only recently, so I'm still totally excited by it, is Baudelaire's famous essay, The Painter of Modern Life. And in this text, basically Baudelaire describes the experience of modernity, or rather the task of the modern painter is to describe the secret of life in a way, and capture life in those moments where it kind of shows itself. And interestingly, the figures that embody the moment where life shows itself is the soldier, the dandy, and the prostitute. Because the soldier kind of shows, in the face of the soldier, the secret of life is mirrored, because the soldier constantly faces death, while in the same way that the prostitute constantly deals with sex. And the dandy, well, let's forget a bit about the dandy. But anyway, so it's sort of the soldier and the prostitute are mirror images, also in the sense that both of them are a total surface. Like Baudelaire writes about in praise of cosmetics in the same way he gets excited about the soldiers' uniforms. It's this idea that you have a kind of a blank surface, a blank mirroring surface in the bling bling and glitter of the kind of prostitute's outfit, just as in the kind of glamorous kind of theatrical outfit of a soldier. So it's an empty surface, and on this empty surface the secret of life is inscribed in the form of sex and death. Right. And he speaks about it is sort of this military nonchalance that is sort of that it shows that on the one moment you're nonchalant, you're total surface, and the next moment you can sort of spring to action and kill and fight. And it's this kind of changing figure that on the one hand you have the kind of clean surface, and then which becomes the surface on which life inscribes itself, that Baudelaire writes about, and which he sees kind of represented in the drawing of Constantine Guise, who was a kind of a correspondent traveling with the troops to the Crim War and sort of sending back his images. And I'm kind of interested by this idea, sort of that because the soldier kind of lives through crisis, he then becomes a kind of a representative of the secret of life, because the secret of life inscribes itself into his surface. And this is why we like to look at soldiers, because for us they kind of represent this kind of secret knowledge, which cannot be expressed, which can only be seen. This is another image, and I talked about this idea to Sean Snyder, the artist who's going to come to give a talk here as well, and he said, like, okay, I can send you a link to some web pages that I just found about military artists working in Iraq today. And I thank Sean very much for it. That is like really crazy stuff. This is sort of drawings that sort of continue the tradition of these Constantine guys by people who sort of are hired by the US Army to go with their watercolors to Iraq, to the front line of action, to capture the secret of life of the troops when they're when they're facing the moment of crisis. And of course, with these images, you get also like really touching accounts of what the artist, these marine artists, think about their images. And he's very much continuing the modernist discourse of Baudelaire that is basically about the idea of catching the moment where the secret of life reveals itself as inscribed into the kind of faces of a tired soldier. So for instance, here we have an account of, what's his name, let me see, of Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Michael D. Fay, and about him, so the report on the homepage says, now in Operation Iraqi Freedom, Fay continues to convert Marine Corps life into art. The hardest part is getting into the feel of everything, he says. Fay already realizes that his work goes far in capturing the ordeal of fellow Marines. I'm out here living in the dirt. My skin's dry from the sun and hopefully my art will convey that experience. So it's what, the dry skin as a surface into which kind of the life is inscribed. US Marine Corps Sergeant Jack M. Carrillo tells a similar story. And he's sort of saying that basically he comes from graffiti art, and sort of painting in war is like doing graffiti art. He says, the spirit of the street art inspired me. It's fast-paced, in-your-face, create-it-and-go art, he said. Any graffiti artist has the potential to be a great combat artist. I love that spirit. It's about the live thing, yeah, doing art live. And they write about him, without the aid of any camera or high-tech broadcast equipment, one Marine completed a very unique mission during Operation Iraqi Freedom, telling the Marine Corps story with nothing more than a sketch pad, pencils, some charcoal, and a very deep love for art. It was a huge honor to be selected for this mission, said Carrillo. It was a dream come true to be able to use my art and ability to tell the Marine Corps story and be a part of something that's bigger than me. And then one more quote. Jack told me he would not tell me what, how, or when to draw, only that I was to be a hustler, get as close to the action as possible and document through art the climate of any given situation. With those simple instructions, I set out to do exactly that. So here we have sort of the mixture of the prostitute and the soldier in the face of the hustler, kind of hustling life by being on the front line and capturing sort of the secret of life as it is revealed in the face of the kind of tired soldier. Also these images of the combat artists at work. And I'm speaking about that not really to make fun of it, but just to explain to myself, to say like, why are we fascinated with the soldier or the soldier as hero? Because in a way it is still this discourse about so the soldier being the witness of the secret of life, and of course we want to know what the secret of life is. You know, that's why we buy sort of hip-hop records, because there you get a story from the ghetto, and this is why we buy sort of the war, because here we get a story of what life is all about in the moment when it's really down to like the real thing, right? Another moment why sort of it is important to think about the soldier in relation to the moment of crisis is because even though the soldier produces crisis by producing war, he also emerges as a cipher of stability out of the crisis of war. It's sort of a typical rhetorical move that if you want to increase your power, you have to create a crisis and then emerge as the one who solves it. It's basically like a firefighter setting fire to a house and then sort of coming to put out the fire. In the same sense, we have this situation that now there is a way to create the idea of a strong political leader as somebody who in crisis knows exactly what to do, even though he might actually be the one producing the crisis. That's just one footnote. Right. So the question is, how do you then deal with this? How do we deal with this kind of mythic fascination of the hero, that sort of the hero sort of embodies the secret of life because he has seen and experienced something that we have not experienced, that he's kind of, he has it inside himself. He embodies this kind of secret. And somebody I think about, alright, okay, this is also sort of speaking about the kind of national and narrative of, because the hero, as somebody who founds the collective, goes back to the roots of the people. as a way, sort of as the hero, as the fireman, as George Bush presented himself with the fireman, is about sort of American values, sort of really kind of getting down to the basics of what your people is about. Here we have another hero, is a kind of Norwegian black metal fan, where you have a similar idea of that the hero kind of reveals the true value of the life of a people again by going back to the Nordic roots of the culture, going to a time before modernity, where the true secret of life of a people lies. And actually, this is also connected to burning. Here it's not the World Trade Center, but these people in Norway, they burn churches to show how evil they are. Maybe this is a bit tasteless, I don't know, but it is very much this idea, sort of you go through the ashes, and from the ashes you kind of recreate the truth of your people, sort of because the crisis puts you down to sort of basic values, like sort of, be it kind of basic American values, or like whatever here in this heavy metal context, it's kind of the kind of secret of your people, sort of your authentic roots that are revealed in the moment of crisis, and it is the hero who reveals them. Right. And the question is how to deal with this. How do you deal with this kind of mystery or the promise of the hero, that the hero sort of might reveal the true secret of life, not just personally but also collectively, so the secret of the life of the nation. And in a way, this got me thinking about Joseph Beuys, because in a way what you feel is, in Beuys you have a kind of compulsive reenactment of precisely that ritual. That he's kind of here in this famous performance, I Like America and America Likes Me, he is staging himself as that hero who reveals the truth of the life of his people. Sort of going to America and playing the kind of weird German guy, right? Sort of revealing the kind of braveness and Teutonic, yeah, you know, you've seen the black metal fans from Norway, it's basically the same story here, right? The question is it just a symptom, or is it actually working on this issue? Is Beuys under the compulsively acting out the spell of this role of the hero? He can't do otherwise. He's an artist. As an artist, you want to be a prophet. So you step into the shoes of the hero and tell people the truth about life, you know? Or is it actually a way of, by reenacting this drama of the hero revealing the truth of life, that you kind of deconstruct it? This is a great performance by Beuys called Der Chef, the chief, and the joke is that he claimed he was doing a parallel in Germany, in Berlin, with Robert Morris in New York. I think it's just a lie, so making a joke about Robert Morris felt pieces. So in the performance, Beuys has kind of wrapped himself in felt for 8 hours, so a proper working day, and was kind of lying in this felt blanket and grunting, making grunting noises, and had a dead rabbit on each side of the felt carpet, and after the performance they went home and cooked the rabbit for dinner. Right? And it's on the one hand creating this idea of the mystery, the mysterious hero who suffers, really doesn't have enough air and goes through the pain to reveal the secret, to have a mystic experience, an individual having a mystic experience for the others and revealing it for the others. And of course reenacting the idea that der Chef, der Führer, the oratic leader, the charismatic individual, who for the rest of the people makes clear what's really at stake. But at the same time, of course, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's funny, it's very funny. These guys like in a felt blanket with 2 dead rabbits grunting for 8 hours. So okay, I got to do my job 8 hours, like proper working day, being the Führer, being the chief, being the hero, and afterwards you have the poor beast for dinner. Yeah? Sort of getting it over with, and sort of in a way exposing the materiality and the ridiculousness of this kind of ritual of staging heroes. So I would argue that here it's in the moment of repeating the fascination of the hero, the joy of the hero, as kind of the prophet revealing the mystic truth of life. He's also deconstructing it by showing like sort of the absurd materiality, the ridiculousness of this ritual. And this is a recent performance video by Marina Abramovic called, if I remember correctly, a Balkan erotic epic or something, and sort of where you see these ladies acting out their sort of folkloristic myth, but in a way acting it out on this folkloristic level, but in a similar, I would say, like boys sort of grunting in the veld, also revealing the absurdity of restaging these moments where sort of the mystic truth is revealed to the people through some exemplary figures. And here we have another performance playing with this role, is Marko Lulic doing Tesla performance, who is kind of like the artist as hero, as prophet, like with his access to a different dimension, the secret of life, electricity, like pure juice, with the stuff from which life is made of. Sort of playing with this idea of the artist as more mystic, reenacting it in a way, acknowledging his fascination with this rhetoric model, but also pushing it to a point where it becomes, funny, ridiculous. So now I want to end with one last thought concerning the question of the contemporaneity of the hero and the possibility or impossibility to speak about the hero. So to kind of summarize, what we had so far is sort of one possibility would speak about sort of the lack, the absence, but the necessity at the same time for a language that could represent collective experience, as in Diamantis Narcavitius. Then we would have a more playful, speculative way and say, like, yeah, collective languages are there, let's use it to stage different heroes, and also maybe expose the contradictions of that language in the process, as in Paulina Orlowska and Lucy McKenzie. Then we had this idea of sort of living through, experiencing the fascination of the hero as the one who reveals the moment of mystic truths of life to the people, for the people, as something that to fully understand the power that lies in this figure, that you have to experience it, go through it, repeat it, and in that moment deconstruct it. So these have been the thoughts so far. Another last thought would be the question of the relation of the hero to the question of pain, and how, because a central moment of the hero is that he suffers the pain of all, and thereby sort of monumentalizes the pain of all by dying for the others, by like a scapegoat taking the pain of the others onto his shoulders or onto her shoulders. This is not just male, as for instance Mathilde Terheine has shown in her work on suicide bombers. It's actually a truth that a large percentage of suicide bombers are actually female, sort of playing this sort of role of self-sacrifice. It's also like, it's not just a male role, but also like a possible for the woman. And I get the feeling that when I look at the work of Bas-Jan Ader, he is speaking very much about this idea of sort of how do you deal with this question of the pain, my pain and the pain of others. Is it still possible to make a work that kind of represents collective pain through a kind of individual pain? And on the one hand, he seems quite, the solution Bas-Jan Ader comes up with is pretty relative. There are these films that he did would play very much with the sort of idea of the tragic hero in the form of the slapstick hero, where he kind of stages falls. For instance, you see, this is just a short black and white film from the late 60s, where you just see him sort of in Amsterdam riding his bicycle around the corner and driving straight into a gracht. And this is another sort of film shot on the top, where he's sitting on the top of his house in LA on a chair and falls over and falls down from the roof. Here it is sort of exemplary actions where he plays the role of the tragic hero through his fall. He kind of, in a way, exemplifies the idea of tragedy, like fall as a general principle, the falling of man, but in an absurd way, sort of almost making fun of it. It's almost like a Buster Keaton kind of stunt. But then there are also some of his films which are much more tragical in a way. For instance, there's this one fantastic film where you see him sort of hanging on a tree, on a branch. He's just like, you don't know why he got up there and who told him to get up there, and he's just hanging there, and at some point it's clear that he won't be able to hold on anymore, and he falls into this into the water. And it's this kind of strange logic that sort of putting yourself in a situation of inevitability. Like, basically you can do whatever you want. No one tells you to get up on this tree. Like, as an artist, no one tells you what to do. So, but what you want to have is a moment of necessity in your life. You want to have a moment where it is not anything goes and nothing matters, but rien ne va plus, nothing goes anymore, and there's just one alternative. And this is exactly what he's doing here. So if he's putting himself in a situation where at some point, if rien ne va plus, nothing will go anymore, and sort of he's basically putting himself into a situation where there's just one possible outcome. There's a wonderful, like, sort of also film by Mathilde Terheine, where she speaks about kind of a woman who commits suicide and who locks herself into her room and then throws the key out of the window and then sets fire to the room. This sort of like systematically putting yourself in a position where there's no way out anymore, where for once sort of this idea of the biggest moment of happiness, when you know that suddenly all the choices are gone. Like you systematically deprive yourself of all choices, of all possibilities, to finally experience a moment of total absolute necessity. That there is just, you cannot hold anymore, there's just one solution, you will fall. As you lock yourself in, you set fire to it, you throw out the key, you will not be able to go out anymore. And there is something like particularly fascinating, and I don't know, it's something I would like to talk about, because it's kind of still also mysterious to me, about the hero as a figure who creates a moment of necessity and inevitability and fate in a moment of contingency. That sort of by pushing things to the borderline and over the borderline, suddenly we're not in a position of freedom anymore, but absolute necessity. A survival, or maybe a situation where all that counts is to save your life, or maybe there's just one outcome, that you will die, or that the inevitable will happen. And I would say that apart from its rhetoricity and from its kind of mythological function, there is something about this kind of logic of the hero, which is kind of getting yourself into situations where contingency disappears and you face a moment of absolute necessity. This is like where people get themselves into trouble, you know, that sort of you get yourself into trouble to solve for once and for all like what is really important in your life. You can always solve your problems, but sometimes you really try to get yourself into trouble to make the experience of the hero to face the moment of necessity. And there is an emotional logic to it, an emotional truth that I'm still kind of confused about, and which I feel that I cannot simply wipe away as a kind of mythological or rhetorical function. And it's that experience that I would like to end with as an open question that I have.